Good afternoon, whatever it is for you when you're watching this video. I decided I wanted to record this rather than do it live, so we could use class time to do a couple other activities or watch a couple videos or do something else other than a lecture here. So what we're going to do is talk about the other parts for the other three of the four regions of the brain. We talked extensively about the cerebrum last time. But remember, there were four regions total, and three others that we still have to take a look at. One is the diencephalon, another is the brainstem, and then the last one is the cerebellum. So the diencephalon is referred to as the through brain. It's kind of the connection between the lower parts of the brain and spinal cord and the cerebrum. So any information coming in to the cerebrum has to pass through the diencephalon to get to the cerebrum. Okay, so like I said, it's connection between the cerebrum and the rest of the brain. So the rest of the brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system send information to the cerebrum through the diencephalon. And any information going out from the cerebrum to the rest of the brain or body has to pass through the diencephalon to get out. Okay, the exception to that is olfaction, which is smell, which goes directly from the nose to the cerebrum and then back. So it doesn't actually have to go through the middle of the brain, the diencephalon. Any name or any part that has the name thalamus in it is part of the diencephalon. All right. So as I go through here, I'm probably going to go faster than you can write things down. But the nice thing is you can pause the video to write those things down. So here's where the diencephalon is located, right? It's made up of the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and the pineal gland. Okay, those are the big parts that we're going to focus on here today. So the thalamus, all sensory information, like I said, except for smell, passes through the thalamus before processing occurs by the cerebral cortex. So any axons from our peripheral sense organs, right? Our eyes, our ears, not our nose, anything for a sense of touch, for example, or taste, synapse with neurons in the thalamus. So information comes in, goes to neurons in the thalamus, and then the thalamus relays that information directly to the cerebrum. It says thalamic neurons project directly to the cerebrum. So information comes in from our senses on the periphery, and that information is relayed to neurons in the thalamus. That would be the thalamic neurons. And then those thalamic neurons relay that information to the cerebrum. Okay. The thalamus does process some of that information as it comes in. So for example, it will receive visual information and then decide which stimuli that come in from the eyes will receive attention by the cerebrum, and which information that's coming in is going to be ignored. Okay. The hypothalamus, like we saw in that picture, is inferior and slightly anterior to the thalamus, and it regulates homeostasis. So the four F's: fight, flight, feeding, and fornication. Right? Those are the four F's that they talk about in psych. I know if you've taken psych, that are controlled by the hypothalamus. So it regulates homeostasis and it controls the autonomic nervous system, which is the division of the nervous system that you don't have conscious control over, that controls things like your blood vessels dilating, your pupils dilating, those kinds of things. And it also controls the endocrine system that produces our hormones that help to keep us in homeostasis. All right. So once again, here's the thalamus, right? So any information coming in from our senses, coming in from the periphery through the spinal cord, has to pass up through the thalamus and then get relayed to the proper part of the cerebrum. Here's where the hypothalamus is located, right? And that is what regulates homeostasis by controlling the autonomic nervous system and the endocrine system. And then the last part of the diencephalon is back here. It's the pineal gland. And the pineal gland secretes the hormone melatonin that regulates sleep patterns. And that's all you really need to know about, right? And as the day gets darker, our pineal gland starts to produce more and more melatonin that makes us sleepier and sleepier and sleepier. And that is why looking at your phone at night in bed is really a bad idea because it stops the pineal gland from producing that melatonin or slows down the production of that melatonin, makes it harder to sleep, which some of you may have noticed that it's harder to sleep if you're checking your phone at night. All right, so the brainstem. The brainstem is made up of three parts here. It's made up of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Okay, the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So those of you who are fans of the movie Waterboy with Adam Sandler would be familiar with the medulla oblongata. Although it's getting pretty old, I don't know if many of you will have seen it. So the midbrain sends auditory information to the thalamus. So information coming in from the ears goes to the midbrain and the brainstem, and then goes to the thalamus. And then that sends that information to the cerebrum, and that's how we are able to perceive sound. The midbrain combines sensory information about our visual space, our auditory space, and our somatosensory space. So what does that mean, right? What that means is that it will take in, say you're walking along and you hear chirping and you see a tree, and then you feel something wet hit your head, right? So the auditory information was the chirping, the visual information was a tree, and the somatosensory information, the sensory information from our body that you get is that something wet hitting your head. The midbrain would be what allows you to combine all that information to realize that a bird was in that tree and just pooped on your head. Okay, so that's kind of what I mean by combining sensory information about visual space, auditory space, and somatosensory space. All right, the midbrain also receives and sends information through some of our cranial nerves. And the cranial nerves are responsible for doing a lot of really important things like moving our tongue, our sense of taste, moving our facial muscles, producing tears, moving our eyes, receiving visual information, receiving auditory information, controlling our balance. Some of our cranial nerves send information to the midbrain in the brainstem, and then the midbrain sends information back out through those same cranial nerves. It also receives and sends information through some of the regions of the brain that regulate the functions of our cardiovascular and respiratory systems. The pons is the main connection between the cerebellum in the back of the brain and the brainstem. So it contains neurons receiving descending information from the cerebrum that is then sent to the cerebellum. And then rapid eye movement sleep, the REM sleep, originates in the pons, that time when we're dreaming, right? The sleeping state where dreams occur, that originates in the pons. And then heart rate and breathing rate will increase during that REM sleep. So one thing I want to do is just go back to this picture here, right? So the descending neurons from the cerebrum send information through the pons to the cerebellum here in the back, right? That's what I was saying here when we talked about the pons. So let me get back to the pons, right? It contains neurons receiving descending information from the cerebrum that then gets sent to the cerebellum. And then REM sleep originates in the pons. That's important to know. The medulla oblongata also processes some of our cranial nerve information, and then it regulates cardiovascular and respiratory systems and rates. So if you have a problem with your medulla oblongata, you're going to have trouble with your heart rate and your heart and respiratory systems as well. So if you have damage to your medulla oblongata, which is a very primitive part of the brain that almost all organisms with a brain have, you're going to have trouble surviving. Okay. And then the last region of the brain I want to look at is the cerebellum, which literally translated means little brain. And what this does is it compares information from your cerebrum. So motor information coming down from the cerebrum, telling you how to move your body and how to walk around. It compares the motor signals coming from the cerebrum with sensory feedback from the surroundings. So it detects if there's changes in terrain, if there's wind, if there's, angles to where you're going to step. And it kind of smooths out those motor commands coming from the cerebrum so that your movements are coordinated and will work in harmony with your surroundings. So the key here is that the cerebellum is responsible for balance and coordination. Okay. If you have damage to the cerebellum, you have what's called cerebellar ataxia. You're really not going to have very coordinated muscle movements. So you won't be able to coordinate your balance or your gait, which is your stride. You won't be able to coordinate the movement of your extremities or your eye movements, right? And what could damage the cerebellum? Again, it could be a blow to the head, it could be a stroke, it could be a tumor, okay, it could be an infection. Alcohol can damage the cerebellum. Um, MS, multiple sclerosis, can damage it. And so, what we'll do in class is we will watch the video on cerebellar ataxia um, as to kind of demonstrate what I mean by how the cerebellum coordinates our balance and our gait and our movements of our extremities. So that's it for the other three regions of the brain, other than the cerebrum. That is the diencephalon, that is the brainstem, and that is the cerebellum. If you have any questions, please make sure that you ask them during class or sign up for academic support time on an A-Day, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Have a great day, and I will see you next class.